High Lady Zayara stood in the grand judgment hall of the Tselari High Council, her expression as cold as the ice-covered moons of her homeworld. The shimmering violet light of the chamber cast eerie shadows over the faces of the noble counselors, their golden eyes fixed on her. She was one of the most powerful figures in the Dominion, an elite warrior, a strategic genius. But today, she was nothing more than a prisoner awaiting punishment. "The decision is final," announced Archlord Varix, his voice echoing through the chamber. "For the crimes of defiance against the United Terran Federation and violation of the peace accords, you are hereby sentenced." He paused, his golden eyes flickering with something unreadable. Zayara did not flinch. She had expected execution, perhaps exile. She was prepared for any fate but the one that came next. To marry a human. A stunned silence fell over the room. Zayara's sharp, reptilian pupils widened for a fraction of a second. Then, rage burned inside her. She had led fleets into battle, crushed human warships under her command. And now, they wanted her to marry one of these creatures. "This is a joke," she said, her voice sharp as a blade. "No," Varix replied. "This is the price of peace." Her fists clenched. The Exilari Dominion had lost the war, but they still had honor. Or so she thought. This was a humiliation beyond anything she could have imagined. "Who is the human?" she asked, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. A door opened, and a figure stepped forward. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and undeniably human. His dark brown hair was slightly tousled, and his sharp blue eyes studied her with an unreadable expression. He wore a formal Terran Federation uniform, his posture relaxed yet commanding. Unlike the Xilari, who valued stoicism, humans carried emotions in their eyes, their expressions, their very presence. "Captain Daniel Hayes," he introduced himself. His voice was calm, neither mocking nor overly formal. Zayara expected arrogance, maybe even fear. Instead, he looked at her as if she was simply a person, not an enemy, not a prize, just someone caught in this absurd situation with him. "I refuse," she said coldly. "You cannot refuse," Varix said. "The treaty demands it. The war is over. You, like all of us, must adapt." Zayara wanted to scream. She wanted to fight, but she could do neither. If she rejected this, the consequences for her people would be worse. Daniel stepped closer, his gaze unwavering. "I didn't ask for this either," he said, voice even. "But if we're stuck with it, we might as well make the best of it." Zayara's jaw tightened. Humans were supposed to be weak, foolish, but something about the way he spoke, steady, unshaken, made her wonder if she had underestimated them. For the first time, she felt something she never had before: uncertainty. Zayara sat in silence as the Xilari transport ship carried her toward the Terran Federation's capital world. She stared out of the window, watching the endless stars stretch across the black void of space. Her life had changed in a single moment. Once a proud commander of the Dominion fleet, now she was nothing more than a political tool, forced to marry a human. The very thought made her scales tighten with anger. Beside her, Captain Daniel Hayes sat with a calm expression. He wasn't nervous, nor was he smug. He simply observed her, as if trying to understand the woman who would be his wife. His patience irritated her. "You don't speak much," he finally said. Zayara turned her golden eyes toward him. "There is nothing to say." Daniel nodded, as if he expected that answer. "All right. Then let's start with something simple. Do you drink coffee?" She frowned. "What? Coffee? It's a human drink. Bitter, but it wakes you up." "I do not consume human beverages." Daniel chuckled. "You might want to start. It's going to be a long life if you refuse everything human." She narrowed her eyes. "This will not be a long life. As soon as I find a way to dissolve this marriage, I will." His smile didn't fade. "And if you can't?" Zayara didn't answer. The idea of being trapped in this arrangement was unbearable. She had always been in control of her fate. Now she was powerless. The ship docked at a massive space station orbiting Terra. The moment the doors opened, a wave of new sounds and scents overwhelmed her. Humans bustled around, talking loudly, laughing, moving in unpredictable ways. The air smelled of different foods, oils, and strange perfumes. "This way," Daniel said, leading her through the station. Zayara kept her head high, ignoring the stares. She was used to being feared. But here, the humans looked at her with curiosity instead. It unsettled her. A small human child pointed at her. "Mom, look, a lizard lady." Zayara's claws tensed, but Daniel simply laughed. "She's Silari, kid, not a lizard." The child giggled and ran off. Zayara glanced at Daniel. "You find amusement in being disrespected." "It's not disrespect. It's just innocence." He shrugged. "Humans don't see you as an enemy anymore, just someone different." Different. The word lingered in her mind. They finally arrived at a private transport that would take them to their residence on Terra. Zayara sat stiffly, her mind racing. "You don't have to like this," Daniel said after a moment. "But you don't have to make it harder on yourself either." Zayara looked at him, studying his calm blue eyes. She didn't understand humans. But for the first time, she wondered if maybe, just maybe, she should try. Zayara stood in the doorway of their new home, her arms crossed, her golden eyes scanning every detail. It was a human dwelling, too open, too warm, and filled with unnecessary decorations. The large window overlooked a bustling Terran city, where people walked freely, laughing, talking, and living their chaotic lives. She hated it. "This will be our home," Daniel said, stepping inside. "It's not a Silari warship, but it's comfortable." Zayara scoffed. "Comfort is irrelevant. A warrior does not need soft furniture and colorful walls." Daniel smirked. "Well, I do. So, get used to it." She narrowed her eyes but said nothing. The treaty forced her to stay here, but that didn't mean she had to enjoy it. She would find a way out of this arrangement. Until then, she would endure. Daniel walked toward the kitchen. "Are you hungry?" "I consume only Xilari nutrition packs." He raised an eyebrow. "You mean those gray cubes that taste like chalk? They provide all necessary sustenance." Daniel shook his head and pulled something from a cabinet. "Try this." He handed her a small round fruit with a red skin. "It's an apple. Humans eat it." Zayara looked at it with suspicion. She had studied human food during the war. It was inefficient, requiring chewing and digestion. Pointless. He took a bite of his own apple, chewing slowly. "Suit yourself." Zayara turned away, ignoring the strange feeling in her chest. Daniel was different from what she had expected. He was supposed to be arrogant, aggressive, or weak. Instead, he was calm. He didn't force her to talk, didn't try to dominate her. He simply existed in the same space, treating her as an equal. It was unsettling. Days passed, and life in the human city continued. Daniel went on diplomatic missions while Zayara remained inside, studying human culture through data screens. Their ways were illogical, emotional, unpredictable. And yet, humans had won the war. One evening, Daniel returned home late. He looked exhausted, his uniform slightly disheveled. "Long day?" she asked before realizing why she had spoken. He glanced at her, surprised. "Yeah, negotiations with the Auxiliary Council are still tense." He sat down on the couch and sighed. "You know, for a species that claims to be logical, your politicians are really stubborn." Zayara smirked slightly. "It is our way." Daniel chuckled. "Yeah, I'm starting to figure that out." He leaned back, closing his eyes. Zayara hesitated. This human confused her. He didn't act like an enemy, nor did he treat her like a burden. He was just there, and for some reason, that made it harder to hate him. She clenched her fists. No, she would not let herself grow comfortable. She was Silari, And this was only temporary, wasn't it? Smelled of spices, grilled meat, and something sweet she could not name. People moved freely, laughing, shouting, and haggling with vendors. It was overwhelming. Daniel walked beside her, hands in his pockets, relaxed as if he belonged here. "You okay?" he asked. Ziara kept her posture straight. "This place is inefficient. Too much noise. Too much movement." He smirked. "That's just life on Terra. People enjoy themselves." She scoffed. "Wasting time on useless activities does not make a species strong." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Really? Because last I checked, we won the war." Ziara tensed. Her pride stung. But she said nothing. As they passed a food stall, a vendor called out, "Hey, you two. Try some Terra's best grilled skewers." Ziara wrinkled her nose. The smell was strong, unfamiliar. "I do not eat human food." Daniel rolled his eyes. "You really should try new things. I consume only Xilari nutrition packs. They provide all necessary sustenance." "Yeah, but do they taste good?" Zayara hesitated. Taste had never been a priority. Taste is irrelevant. Daniel smirked, buying a skewer anyway. He took a bite, signing with satisfaction. "You're missing out." She watched him, confused. How could something as simple as food bring a warrior joy? Humans were strange. They continued walking until they reached a large open space where music played. People gathered, moving in rhythm, their bodies swaying and spinning. Zayara tilted her head. "What are they doing?" "Dancing," Daniel said, grinning. Zayara frowned. "For what purpose?" "For fun." She stared at him. Pointless. Daniel chuckled. "Not everything needs a purpose, Zayara. Sometimes we just live." She watched the dancers, their expressions filled with joy. No structure, no rules, just movement. The Exilari would never allow such foolishness. And yet, something about it fascinated her. Suddenly, Daniel held out a hand. "Want to try?" Zayara recoiled. "Absolutely not." He laughed. "Come on, just one dance." "I do not move like that." "Then I'll teach you." She looked at him, at his easy smile, his confidence, a human, offering to teach a Xilari. The idea was ridiculous, and yet, for a brief moment, she almost considered it. Almost. She turned away. "This treaty will not make me human." Daniel nodded, still smiling. "No, but it might help you understand us." Zayara remained silent as the music played on. Maybe understanding humans was not the problem. Maybe the real problem was that part of her wanted to. 3/3. Zayara sat in the dimly lit living room, her golden eyes fixed on the glowing data screen in front of her. Reports from the Xilari Dominion filled the screen. Political updates, military movements, and subtle hints of unrest. Her people were struggling to accept the treaty, just as she was. The sound of footsteps pulled her attention away. Daniel walked in, wearing casual human clothing instead of his usual uniform. He carried 2 steaming mugs, setting one in front of her. "Tea," he said. "No caffeine. Just something to relax." Zayara eyed the drink with suspicion. Humans seem obsessed with beverages. Daniel smirked. "Drinks make conversations better. You should try it." She hesitated, then lifted the mug, taking a small sip. The warmth spread through her, and she was surprised by the pleasant taste. Not bad. "You've been reading reports all day," Daniel observed, "planning your escape." Zayara set the mug down. "Understanding my situation." And she met his gaze. "I am trapped." Daniel sighed, leaning back on the couch. "You know, I didn't ask for this either. But we're here now. Fighting it every second isn't going to change anything." Zayara narrowed her eyes. "You accept this arrangement too easily." He shrugged. "Humans adapt. We survive." Zayara studied him. His kind had defeated her people, not through brute force, but through adaptability, persistence, and something else she had never understood: hope. Humans didn't just conquer, they changed the worlds they touched. Daniel set his mug down and stretched. You know, for someone who claims to hate all things human, you're starting to get used to this place. Zayara scoffed. Do not mistake tolerance for acceptance. He chuckled. All right. But tell me something. What do Xilari actually enjoy? What makes you happy? She hesitated. No one had ever asked her that. Xilari warriors did not pursue happiness. They pursued strength, victory, and duty. But was that all there was? Finally, she answered, I enjoy combat, training, testing my limits. Daniel nodded. Okay, we can work with that. Before she could ask what he meant, he stood and gestured toward the open space in the room. Come on, let's spar. Zayara raised an eyebrow. You wish to fight me? Unless you're afraid of losing, he teased. Her pride bristled. I do not lose. Daniel grinned. Then prove it. For the first time since coming to Terra, a small flicker of excitement sparked within Zayara. A true challenge. She stood, rolling her shoulders, her sharp gaze locking onto him. Do not hold back, human. Daniel smirked. Wouldn't dream of it. As they moved into position, something shifted in the air between them. It was no longer just duty or resentment. For the first time, Zayara felt something new. Curiosity. Zayara stood in the center of the room, muscles tense, her sharp golden eyes locked onto Daniel. He stood across from her, rolling his shoulders, looking relaxed. Too relaxed. You should take this seriously, she warned. Daniel smirked. Oh, I am. She didn't wait for him to move first. Xilari warriors never hesitated. With lightning speed, she lunged forward, her hand aiming for his shoulder in a swift takedown maneuver. But Daniel sidestepped at the last second. Zayara's eyes widened as she barely stopped herself from stumbling. He was faster than she expected, more precise. Not bad, he said, grinning. But you're predictable. Zayara growled, circling him. You think you can outmatch me? Nope, he said, just trying to keep up. She attacked again, this time testing his reflexes with a series of rapid strikes. To her surprise, he blocked most of them, dodging the rest. His movements were different from Xilari combat. Fluid, adaptable. He wasn't relying on brute strength, but on strategy, adjusting to her every move. For the first time in years, Zayara felt challenged. She pressed harder, pushing him back. But then, he surprised her. Daniel ducked low and swept her legs out from under her. She hit the ground with a thud, stunned. Before she could react, he pinned her wrist against the floor, hovering just above her. Gotcha. For a moment, there was only silence. Their breathing was heavy, their faces inches apart. His blue eyes met hers, filled with something she couldn't define. Zayara's heart pounded, not from the fight, but from something else, something unfamiliar. She gritted her teeth. With a sharp movement, she twisted her body, flipping them over so she was on top. She pressed her forearm against his throat lightly, not enough to harm, just enough to make a point. His smirk didn't fade. All right, you win. She released him and stood up, offering a hand. He took it, and she pulled him to his feet. That, Daniel said, rubbing his neck, was the most fun I've had in a long time. Zayara frowned. Combat is not for fun. He chuckled. Maybe not for you, but I think you enjoyed it. She looked away, unwilling to admit the truth. She had enjoyed it, more than she should have. Daniel stretched his arms. You're really good, you know. Maybe one day, you'll teach me some Xilari moves. Zayara glanced at him, studying his easy smile, his relaxed posture. This human, he was different. He challenged her in ways no one else ever had. For the first time, she wondered if maybe, just maybe, being here wasn't a curse after all. Late at night, Zayara sat alone on the balcony, staring at the stars. The sky on Terra was different from Silari Prime. Too bright, too full of life. She should have been thinking about escape, about duty, about the war her people had lost. But instead, her mind kept replaying the sparring match with Daniel. The way he had moved. The way he had smiled even after she had won. The way he looked at her, like she was more than just a warrior. It was unsettling. "You'll burn a hole in the sky if you keep staring like that." Daniel's voice broke her thoughts. She turned to see him stepping onto the balcony, holding 2 cups of tea. He handed her one. She took it without thinking. "You don't sleep much, do you?" he asked. "Silari warriors need little rest." Daniel leaned against the railing, taking the sip. "That why you're out here? Or is something else on your mind?" Zayara hesitated. She was not used to sharing her thoughts. Silari did not talk about feelings. They buried them. But Daniel asked questions. And worse, she found herself wanting to answer. Finally, she said, "I do not understand you, human." Daniel smirked. "You'll have to be more specific. You fight well, but you do not crave battle. You make peace with enemies who would rather destroy you. And even now, you treat me with kindness, though I was once your enemy." Daniel exhaled, setting his cup down. "I don't see you as my enemy, Zayara. Not anymore." She tensed. "Then what am I?" He looked at her, his blue eyes searching hers. For once, he did not joke. "I don't know yet, but I think you're more than just a warrior." Zayara's chest tightened. More than a warrior. She had never been anything else. She turned away, gripping the railing. "You are foolish." "Maybe," Daniel said, "but that doesn't mean I'm wrong." The silence stretched between them, filled only by the distant sounds of the city below. Then, without thinking, she asked, "What do humans want from life?" Daniel raised an eyebrow. "That's a big question." She glanced at him. "Then give me a big answer." He chuckled softly. "We want different things. Love, adventure, purpose, happiness." Zayara frowned. "Happiness is not a goal. It is a distraction." Daniel tilted his head. "Or maybe it's the most important thing of all." She didn't respond. Because deep down, part of her wondered, had she been fighting for the wrong thing all along? For the first time, she didn't know what scared her more. The idea that she was wrong, or the idea that Daniel might be right. Zayara had always been strong, always controlled, always in command of her emotions, but Daniel was breaking through her defenses, without even trying. She noticed it in small things. The way she no longer found his presence annoying. The way she sometimes caught herself listening to his laugh a little too closely. The way his words lingered in her mind long after their conversations ended. It was dangerous. And yet, she could not stop it. One evening, as they walked through the city, Daniel led her toward a park. The air was fresh, the soft glow of human streetlights illuminating the trees. Families sat on benches, children ran through the grass, and in the distance, music played from a street performer's instrument. "This," Daniel said, gesturing around, "is what we fight for." Zayara watched the humans interact. No strict formations, no rigid discipline, just life, flowing without rules. It should have been chaotic. Instead, it felt peaceful. "I don't understand," she admitted. "Your kind wastes time on things that do not strengthen you." Daniel smiled. "Depends on what you think strength is." Zayara turned to him, frowning. "Strength is power. It is control. It is the ability to win battles." "Maybe," Daniel said, "but what's the point of winning battles if you have nothing to protect?" The question struck her harder than she expected. She had spent her whole life preparing for war, training to be the perfect warrior, fighting for the Xelari Dominion. But what was she really fighting for? Daniel chuckled. "You know, you never answered my question from before." "What question?" "What makes you happy?" Zayara opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. She did not know the answer. Daniel watched her carefully. Happiness isn't weakness, Zayara. It's what makes life worth living. For the first time, she felt something shift inside her, a crack in the armor she had built around her heart. And Daniel was the one causing it. She looked away. You are reckless, human. He smirked. And yet, you're still here. She had no response. Because he was right. Zayara had spent her whole life believing emotions were a weakness. And yet, as she stood on the training grounds, watching Daniel spar with a group of human soldiers, she felt something unfamiliar twist in her chest. Concern. He was skilled, more than she had given him credit for. His movements were precise, controlled, and adaptable. But unlike Silari warriors, he did not fight with brutality. He fought with instinct, fluid and unpredictable. A soldier lunged at him, and Daniel dodged, countering with a swift strike. Another came at him from behind, but he pivoted smoothly, knocking them off balance. Zayara should have been impressed. Instead, she was worried. The moment Daniel stumbled slightly, she reacted before thinking. She stepped forward. But he recovered quickly, blocking the next attack and winning the match. The soldiers clapped him on the back, laughing. Daniel grinned, wiping sweat from his brow as he walked toward her. Enjoying the show, he teased. She crossed her arms. You fight well, for a human. Daniel smirked. Coming from you, I'll take that as high praise. She hesitated, then spoke before she could stop herself. You could have been injured. His smirk faded slightly. You sound like you were worried. Zayara tensed. Was she? She had never worried about anyone before. She had never cared. She turned away. You are part of the treaty. If something happens to you, it could cause complications. Daniel chuckled. Sure, let's go with that. His voice was light, but his eyes studied her too closely. He was beginning to see through her. That unsettled her more than anything. That night, she sat alone in her quarters, staring at her reflection in the mirror. For the first time, she did not see only a warrior. She saw a woman who had begun to question everything she had ever known. And worse, a woman who had started to feel something she should not feel. For a human. For him. Zayara stood on the balcony again, staring at the stars. But this time, her mind was not on the sky. It was on him. Daniel, the human who had somehow gotten past her defenses, the man who had made her question everything she had been taught, the one who made her feel things she had no name for. She heard footsteps behind her. She didn't need to turn around to know it was him. Couldn't sleep? Daniel asked, leaning against the railing beside her. Zayara exhaled slowly. Sleep is not the problem. Daniel studied her, his blue eyes calm yet curious. Then what is? She hesitated. The words were stuck in her throat. She had never spoken them before. Never needed to. But now, they had to be said. You, she admitted, her voice quiet but firm. You are the problem. Daniel blinked, surprised. Me? She turned to face him. I do not understand you. I do not understand this. She gestured between them, frustration clear in her golden eyes. Humans and Selari do not belong together. And yet, she trailed off. She could not finish the sentence. Daniel didn't push her. He simply nodded, as if he understood more than she was saying. Zayara, he said gently, you don't have to understand it. Sometimes things just are. She clenched her fists. That is not how I was raised. I know what he said, but maybe it's time for you to decide what you believe. She inhaled sharply. For so long, she had been a warrior, a soldier, a weapon for her people. But now, for the first time, she wanted something for herself. Or rather, someone. Daniel. Slowly, she reached out, hesitating only for a moment before touching his hand. It was warm, steady, real. Daniel smiled. He didn't pull away. He didn't rush her. He just waited. And for the first time in her life, Zayara let her walls fall. She didn't know what the future held. Didn't know if the universe would allow a Xelari and a human to be together. But in that moment, under the stars, she knew one thing for certain. She didn't want to fight this anymore.